Revolution is for any country the most violent means of change, bringing as it does death, destruction, and hatred. The Cuban Revolution drove out one dictator, but it produced another, Fidel Castro. Little did the Cuban people suspect that Castro would betray their cause and deliver them into the hands of the most ruthless of all tyrannies, into the iron grip of communism. This is Cuba, where communism has established its first bridgehead in the Western Hemisphere. This modern-day Trojan horse is centrally located between North and South America. It provides communism with a convenient arsenal of planes, tanks, and modern weapons, just 90 miles from American shores, only 7 minutes by jet. From this land of sugarcane and luxurious hotels, Castro's agents foment revolution throughout Latin America. Cuba and communism pose the most serious and immediate threat to the security of the United States and its southern neighbors. It is of little importance that the roulette wheels spin no longer and that the gambling casinos are closed. But it is of great importance that the big naval base at Guantanamo Bay, which is occupied by the United States under a legal treaty, continues to operate. From it, the United States is able to keep a watchful eye on the Caribbean. Nor does the free world wish to see it become a launching site for red missiles or a red submarine base. To understand how Castro came to power, we must go back to March 10th, 1952. Senator Fulgencio Batista, a former Cuban dictator, is a candidate for the presidency in the coming election, scheduled in July. When popular feeling indicates a disastrous defeat for him, he decides again to clamp a dictatorship on this hapless island. With 13 conspirators, he enters Camp Columbia near Havana and wins over the garrison. Batista's men mount machine guns at Camp Columbia. Using captured tanks, they move on the presidential palace in Havana. Batista knows how to get army support. He was an army sergeant when he first seized power in 1933. He treated the army well when he ran Cuba. A radio dispatcher named Rafael Salas Canizares is made chief of all of his police and becomes his hatchet man. The obsolete war surplus ships of the Cuban Navy are caught in the bay with their guns strapped down. Army units in the interior surrender by telephone. Batista's chief obstacle is the president, Carlos Prio Socarrás. Tanks and cars are sent racing to the presidential palace. Desperately, Prio tries to get the garrisons outside Havana to support him. When the prospect appears hopeless, Prio takes sanctuary in the Mexican embassy. Overnight, through the army, Batista is in control of Cuba. He is a typical Western Hemisphere dictator, not motivated by any political ideology, only by a lust for power and wealth. He will bleed the country white and create the climate which breeds revolution. His first step is to suspend the democratic constitution, which guaranteed civil rights to all Cubans. In the Mexican embassy, President Prio Socarrás arranges to take refuge in that country. His family accompanies him. He also takes with him $40 million amassed during his presidency. He will use millions of this to finance the revolution at a later date. Batista quickly forms his first cabinet. Under the good neighbor policy of non-intervention in the internal affairs of other countries, the United States quickly recognizes his new government. Batista orders the suspension of all civil rights. The students from the university, outpost of Liberty in Havana, carry out a mock burial of the Constitution, walking in a funeral procession to the tomb of Eduardo Chibas, a recent political martyr. Batista police respond with widespread arrests. They round up every possible suspect. The police stations are busy day and night. But the suspension of civil rights kindles more student violence. The thirst for freedom burns among the Cuban people. While Batista rules, there are 19,000 political murders. 11,000 people are exiled. Jose Antonio Echeverria, later to become a martyr of the revolution, exhorts his fellow students to act. A pro-Batista faction smears this statue of a student hero with red paint. Shortly thereafter, they begin a series of street demonstrations, which the police are determined to break up. A student leader is carried from the scene and rushed to the hospital. He dies there under the surgeon's knife. Death in one demonstration becomes the reason for another demonstration. Students marching arm in arm down the street defy police. Bearing a comic likeness of Batista labeled assassin, the mob marches to the CMQ radio station where he is hung in effigy. Police send reserves to scatter the demonstrators and to put an end to the incidents. Pursued by the police, the students head for the sanctuary of the university, which is considered outside civil jurisdiction. That doesn't stop Batista's police. They collar the ringleaders and hustle them off. The students are defended by Pelaya Cuervo Navarro, a former senator and opposition leader. Shortly after, Pelaya Cuervo is shot dead by police when they pick him up for questioning. Police cars and buses take students to a trial which is a mere formality. Daily headlines tell stories of terror. One announces that 7 revolutionary suspects die in a police raid. Batista's hatchet man, Salas Canizares, now is wearing the star of a brigadier. Those who speak out are arrested. Most Cubans seek an end to this oppression. Their desire for action creates a force which the small but highly organized group of communists in Cuba know only too well how to exploit. With the opposition mounting, Batista takes drastic action. Interior Minister Arturo Hermitas meets with radio executives and publishers. Hermitas tells them that the government demands prior censorship of their news reports. Nothing is to be broadcast or printed that is displeasing to Batista. Terror is abroad. The bloody stage is set for a young opportunist named Fidel Castro. July 26, 1953, the fledgling revolutionary Castro sends some 85 poorly armed and untrained men against Moncada Barracks, a fortified garrison manned by 1,000 trained troops. The result is a massacre of Castro's men, his first act of treachery to Cuba's freedom fighters. When he orders his followers to attack in 26 trucks, the garrison machine guns them at leisure. He flees. Those foolish enough to surrender are struck down with gun butts, stripped of their uniforms and shot. It is ironic that this fantastic sacrifice of human life provides Fidel Castro with what he wants, a symbol whereby he can claim the leadership of the revolution and achieve his real goal, utter domination of Cuba. He names his group the 26th of July movement. Fidel takes refuge in a church while the soldiers pick over the clothing of his dead companions. Says one survivor of this abortive attack, I quote, "We were betrayed because of Fidel Castro's personal ambition." Barracks Commander Colonel Alberto Chaviano beat off the attack. He is rewarded with a General's Star. The barracks wounded are treated in the hospital, which Castro's men held briefly during the fighting. The barracks dead get military honors. It is carnival time when the Moncada attack takes place, but the festivities turn into a macabre nightmare as Batista police swoop down upon the people. The hunt for conspirators is led by General Salas Canizares, who looks over the arms discovered in the search. The city of Santiago is in a state of siege. Saboteurs bomb and wreck in a series of demonstrations, and the police retaliate in kind. Fidel Castro still hides. but appeals for mercy through the Catholic Church to Cardinal Artiaga, whom he will later denounce. He is finally assured a civil trial, meaning no death penalty. The raids go on as Batista's men comb the island for arms. Castro surrenders. At his trial in October of 1953, many companions and his brother Raul and he are sentenced to 15 years at the penal colony on the Isle of Pines. There, brother Raul and Fidel hold classes in communist theory. Raul particularly is a well-trained teacher. Fed to the teeth with Batista's brand of government, many Cubans begin to associate their hopes with the young revolutionary Castro, now in jail. 1954, other revolutionary fronts are operating in Havana. Student demonstrations are staged before the doors of the National Assembly. The government replies with oppressive decrees. Terror breeds terror. Every decree leads to demonstrations, and the fighting leads to more decrees, a bloody cycle. (1955). In an attempt to cope with the serious unrest in Cuba, Batista tries appeasement. A general amnesty frees a beardless Fidel Castro and others from prison. His brother Raul leaves with him. They are greeted by his sister Lydia. Also, there are two girls who were at Moncada, Melba Hernandez and Heidi Santa Maria. Fidel's wife had divorced him for desertion and non-support before he was jailed. He announces that he will leave the country to organize an invasion. April 1956. In Cuba, revolutionary forces keep pressure on Batista. 13 bodies lying in a courtyard on a Sunday afternoon tell the story of an attempt to storm a fort in Matanzas. Like Fidel Castro's assault on Moncada barracks 3 years before, the trucks get through the gates, but the men are outgunned. Those who surrender are shot down. Police raids follow. Suspects are arrested. Weapons are seized. Batista, shown with Defense Minister Garcia Montez, sneers at captured guns, orders the greatest possible publicity for the trials. All the details are filmed. The strong man wants everyone to know that the rebels were stopped, their arms seized. Those who survive receive summary justice. October 1956, Colonel Blanco Rico, Batista's chief police spy, is assassinated. General Celis Canizares hotly pursues 10 suspects into the Haitian embassy. This time, a bullet stops him. His brother forces his way inside and machine guns all 10 suspects. Canizares' career is over. His rise was swift, but swifter still his fall. Cuban freedom fighters in exile worked feverishly to raise funds and to buy arms to fight Batista. In New York's Yankee Stadium, their leaflets hold up a baseball game. Castro flies to Miami to raise funds for the revolution. Arms are gathered in the United States, whose policy of non-intervention makes this illegal. Some are confiscated. By devious means, some arms get to Cuba and are stored. Mexico City is another place where exiles gather and plan. A huge war chest is raised. Former President Prio, now one of Castro's backers, adds to it. Castro buys arms and a 58-foot yacht, the Grama, built to carry 14 people, and loads her with 82 men and much ammunition. He decides to invade Cuba now. The Grama leaks. Her engines are bad. The invasion is an even worse fiasco than Fort Moncada. The chosen cove has shoals and the Grama goes aground. Ammunition and medicine must be left behind. It takes the 82 men 4 hours to get to the shore. Worse still, an alarm goes out. A few minutes later, Batista's troops ambush them. 13 escape to the Sierra Maestra Mountains. For the others, the revolution is over. As Castro climbs the rugged peaks, he keeps his own counsel about his ultimate objectives. There is no mention now of cementing the 26th of July movement to the Cuban Communist Party. Many of his followers would have deserted such a camp. Instead, Castro preaches about a democratic Cuba with free elections. His followers live as best they can. Soon a number of girls follow Castro into the mountains to help with the cooking and sometimes with the fighting. But the men still pulled KP duty. Despite the hardships, Castro himself lives well. The scene has changed since he was a gun-toting student bully who was implicated in 2 campus murders. Target practice occupies him between long-winded speeches. His lieutenants organize his army while he concentrates on his plan to make his 26th of July movement and himself top dog among the revolutionary fronts. In Havana, things are not going as well as the government would have the world believe. While Batista smiles and shakes hands, still another revolutionary group is planning a surprise. March 13th, 1957, Jose Antonio Echeverria, leader of the students, organizes an attack on the presidential palace, which for sheer courage was unequaled in the annals of the revolution. The rebels fight their way across the open plaza against murderous gunfire. They reach the 2nd floor, but Batista escapes, and the student leaders are shot. The fighting ebbs out of the palace and across Zayas Park, leaving 25 bodies in its wake. Bystanders are caught in the crossfire. Police, looking for the instigators, shoot down Jose Echeverria, who prematurely screamed over a radio station, "The tyrant is dead." Supplies reach the Sierra Maestra by mountain trail. Through a wilderness of cliffs come guns, ammunition, and money. Money goes to Castro from the United States, Venezuela, and other Latin American countries. And medical supplies are brought into this mountain fortress in the middle of nowhere. July 12, 1957, Castro issues a manifesto calling upon all the revolutionary fronts to unite under him, of course. The manifesto calls for a democratic government and free elections. In the cities, the attack on the presidential palace, which almost succeeded, gives people new courage. The anti-Batista opposition increases. Police shoot down Frank Pais, boss of the rebel underground, as he flees from a hideout. His funeral in Santiago disturbs the government because of the size of the crowd and its temper. Women with great emotion chanting, "Vengeance, vengeance." Police leave the bodies of the revolutionists on the sidewalk. Farmers suspected of aiding Castro's men are hanged where caught. Where possible, Cubans raise their voices against abuses. Sometimes the voices are loud. Sometimes the voices are still. Along the road of the revolution, Fidel Castro's couriers maintain contact with the outside world. The rider carries the message under his saddle. It is a kind of Cuban Pony Express, primitive to be sure, but it is upon such basic communication that the 26th of July movement moves. A professional communist from the Argentine named Ernesto Che Guevara joins Castro. He worked with the Reds there and in Guatemala. He met Castro in Mexico City and is an expert in guerrilla tactics. The Castro rebels plant bombs in buses on railroad trains. They set fire to cars and trucks, oil tanks and factories. They get money to finance the revolution by forcing sugar plantation owners to pay for protection against their nightly raids. The road of the revolution exports terror, imports guns, new recruits, and leaders who turn out to be even more pro-communist than anti-Batista. Castro welcomes them, and soon they become his closest advisors. But he still denies that he is a Red. There is Celia Sanchez, who had taken part in planning the attack on Moncada Barracks, and who now is constantly at Castro's side. Her communist connections are hardly a secret. Che Guevara has now worked himself into one of the top spots in the 26th of July movement. He is in command of many troops and exercises a Rasputin-like influence over Castro. He hates the United States. The recruits who swarm into the mountains are mainly poor farm workers. There are few communists among them, but Che Guevara will be a good teacher. men learn guerrilla fighting literally from the ground up. Now ready to attack, they move on the mountain village of Pino de Agua. The raiders bring their doctor with them. He has a busy time as the fire of the government troops rips into the attackers. An operating room is set up in the field. The rebel surprise attack traps Batista's forces. In the gray dawn, Batista's army commander asks for terms. The rebels call it their biggest victory. Up to now, the tactics have been to harass and terrorize government troops. Now, at last, they have won a battle. The women in the army make pictures of the prisoners for publicity purposes. 1958, 3 days after Easter Sunday, Batista orders 12,000 troops into the Sierra Maestra. They stream eastward on every highway, in tanks, armored cars, trucks, and jeeps. But Castro retreats deeper into the mountains, scorching the earth, prodded on by government planes. The rebel radio tells the story. We have driven Batista from his lair. Now we have him in the open. We shall destroy him. In Havana, Batista invites the press to his palace. There are sandbags on the roof. The dictator announces that he had ordered a general advance against Castro. Columns of tanks moving out for the kill are reviewed by General Francisco Tabernilla, Batista's chief of staff. He sends in bazooka teams, which Castro's men capture and turn against Tabernilla's tanks. Castro records his broadcasts for the rebel radio. His men now will come down from the mountains and fight on the plains. Summer 1958. While the troops prepare the attack, the heads of the other major revolutionary fronts meet in Caracas. When Castro gives a worthless promise guaranteeing democracy and free elections, they agree to unite behind the 26th of July movement. Guevara will now lead the troops against Santa Clara. Capturing many towns, they press on toward the provincial capital. Batista's Air Force strikes back. Even without air cover, Castro's men attack houses on the outskirts of Santa Clara. Some of the young recruits whom General Tabernilla throws into the fight quickly surrender to the hard-bitten guerrillas. As Christmas Day 1958 approaches, Che Guevara orders the final assault. While the battle still rages, citizens wait to greet the revolutionary fighters. Single file, Guevara's men enter the city. The Air Force continues to strafe and bomb them. Townspeople flee to shelters. Much of the city is in flames. Batista's fighters and bombers take part in the all-out raid. Women and children suffer the most. The raid does more harm to the city and its population than it does to the troops of the 26th of July movement. The battle for Santa Clara is over. Resistance in the city ends. Che Guevara, the communist, gets a reception from the people of the town. With him is Camilo Cienfuegos, a top rebel commander who is violently anti-communist. The rebel soldiers take over. The city buries its dead. Fidel Castro calls a strategy meeting. They hear news that the revolutionary forces all over the island are rising against Batista. The end is near. This is the moment that Castro and brother Raul, who has been trained behind the Iron Curtain, have been waiting for. 5.5 years after the first Moncada attack, Batista sees the handwriting on the wall and flees the country. New Year's Day, 1959. The news spreads through Havana. Batista is finished. He has left the government in the hands of his General Cantillo. Where is Castro? Now that the revolution is over, why doesn't he come? Batista's henchmen have fled. The 26th of July, civilian militia, organized underground, takes over. Out of control, the surging crowds attack government buildings. Soon the belongings of the hated oppressors are in flames. The crowd turns on the gambling casinos run by Meyer Lansky and other American hoodlums under Batista protection, and to wrecking telephones. The situation before long is completely out of hand. Mobs loot and pillage, gangs roam the streets. More than one woman is seized by hysterics. Men are overcome. Anarchy reigns. Castro has started for Havana, but he stops in every town to conduct military trials and executions. He leaves no opposition in his wake. Castro names Manuel Urrutia president of the provisional government, the same judge who helped the rebels after the Moncada incident. Orders to disarm go out to the student groups in Havana. The Communist Party, which is gaining control of the organization of the new government, cannot trust this group. Urrutia will not last long. He does not see eye to eye with the communists. General Cantillo, the man whom Batista left behind, had put up only feeble resistance. He sent an armored train to Santa Clara. Before he could do much more, fellow officers put him under arrest and go over to Castro in a body. Castro broadcasts speeches urging the people to be calm and telling them that every war criminal will be tried, arrested, and punished. There is wide support for the Magic 26. Unfortunately, few suspect what it really stands for, nor do they ask. To them, it signals the end of the Batista regime. The first truckloads of Fidelistas arrive. They are in command of Che Guevara. It is Havana's first glimpse of the bearded and almost legendary rebels who had fought down out of the mountains. They bring along their captured tanks just in case. Castro does not reach Havana until January 8th. The whole city is duped by this deceitful egomaniac, who in speech after speech makes such promises as, we quote, "There can be no freedom or liberty without democracy, and there can be no democracy without elections. I pledge elections within 18 months," unquote. Like Hitler and Mussolini in more ways than one, he finds it difficult to pass up a single balcony. But there will be no elections. This is the beginning of Castro's democracy by acclamation, the shouting response of a hand-picked mob agreeing with the proposals of the dictator. He stands this night at Camp Columbia with his general, the bearded anti-communist Camilo Cienfuegos. Cienfuegos, once a Miami handyman and a New York dishwasher, will disappear, reportedly gunned down by Raul Castro's pilot while flying back to Havana after a fight with Raul. The celebration goes on. These are not politically minded people. They fought for the simple things, for some degree of human dignity, for the right to work and eat, and to speak without fear, and to go to church, and to have a say about who is to govern them. If they had only known that Castro promised these rights for every Cuban to further his personal lust for power, how could they know he would allow the Russians to steal their revolution? If Batista was like Hitler, truly Castro will prove to be like Stalin. The unfortunate people of Cuba will discover that they have been betrayed. The time will come when many of these same simple people, now wildly cheering Fidel Castro, will be fighting again to rid themselves of this new tyrant. Just 90 miles away, Miami feels the backwash of the revolution as refugees stream in to avoid the firing squads. Batista goes to the Dominican Republic. One of those who gets out by the skin of his teeth is Batista's son. But waiting for him is an anti-Batista Cuban who wants to get in some licks of his own. They have a pitched battle at a Florida airport. A gun is found later, but it was not used. The 26th of July movement holds meetings all over Havana, and almost always Celia Sanchez takes her place near Castro. Known as a dedicated communist sympathizer, she now holds an important spot as private secretary to him. For safety, he travels about by tank. 3 weeks after Batista's fall, Castro promptly accepts an invitation from Venezuela to visit that country. From the airport, Castro rides through cheering crowds who hail him as the Cuban liberator. These are not communist crowds, but plain people who have just gotten a dictator off their own backs. The people of Venezuela contributed money to the Cuban Revolution. Little do they know that within a matter of months, Castro will be using the Cuban embassy to help the local Venezuelan communists to conspire against their government. At the university, Castro receives an honorary degree. Even in New York's Central Park, Castro receives a public reception as liberator of the Cuban people. Few doubt his sincerity. Few know what he plans to do next. Back in Cuba, Castro's executions form a chapter by themselves. They began during Castro's march into Havana and gave his new government a potent weapon, terror. The first trials were based on evidence of Batista brutality, but they will soon be held for those who disagree with Castro. Implements of torture are put into evidence, tools to tear back the fingernails and perform even more brutal forms of torture. Some cannot be shown. But the speed of the trials makes the world wonder if there may not be some innocent victims. Crowds jam the courtroom to see the war criminals hauled before the bar of revolutionary justice. Scores of such trials send 600 men before the firing squads until the world cries out for Castro to stop this mass murder. It's a gripping scene when Colonel Cornelio Rojas, Batista's commander at Pina del Rio, strides to his death as though on parade. The orders are read, farewells are spoken, last-minute instructions are given. The verdict of revolutionary justice is to be spoken in the language of finality. Thus speaks Castro justice. Each new trial is a carbon copy of the one before. The charges read, the accusation made, the finger pointed, and the verdict rendered. There is little point in attempting a defense. The result is a foregone conclusion, as at this trial of Lieutenant D'Espagny. Castro cannot understand the avalanche of criticism. After all, he says, there are trials. Batista never gave any of the people a trial, he shouts angrily. We are executing murderers, and they deserve to be shot. Convicted by the fast-moving revolutionary justice, Lieutenant D'Espagny's appeal was heard and denied the same day. The death sentence stands. He writes a note to his wife and son, then asks permission to give the order to fire himself. There is no appeal from death. No pleas from the outside world could stop the trials. The people get their revolutionary justice. While world attention is focused on the executions, the Communist Party takes over Cuba step by step. Antonio Núñez Jiménez takes charge of the Agrarian Reform Institute with plans to run the entire Cuban economy. Fidel Castro nods assent and signs the decrees. Jiménez leads the peasants to believe that they are getting the 66 acres which they were promised. There are joyful demonstrations in anticipation of this great event. They are in for a rude shock when the few who do get deeds discover that the deeds provide that they occupy the land, work for the state, and cannot sell the land. The long-range plan laid by Jiménez and his Marxist friend Che Guevara is to take over everything. They are joined by Osvaldo Dorticos Dorado, who became president when Castro ousted President Urrutia for disagreeing with the leftist trend of the government. The red ties are plain to see when a Russian airliner sets down in Cuba with the Soviet Union's hard-nosed traitor, Anastas Mikoyan. The crowds hear that Mikoyan has come to offer help. Mikoyan knows the Kremlin has a big stake in Cuba and is here to talk business. President Osvaldo Dorticos greets the Soviet traveler, and no time is wasted. They agree that Russia will immediately extend full diplomatic recognition to the revolutionary government, and the Reds will reopen an embassy in Havana. At a party, Guevara makes snapshots of the Russian visitor, who has gone native. Castro tells Mikoyan of his plan to expand the Fidelista revolution to all of Latin America. Mikoyan suggests using Cuban diplomatic pouches to spread subversion. He smacks his lips at the prospect of getting a base from which to spread communism to all of Latin America. Castro hears that the Reds will supply oil, buy Cuban sugar, send him technicians, supply him with more Soviet planes and arms. It isn't long before the new tactics are pursued by the National Institute for Agrarian Reform. While Mikoyan is still in Cuba, Che Guevara tells him the revolution has taken over 51% of the land. Through Castro's INRA, the government owns cane fields, the plantations, pasture land. And the Guajiros, the workers who were promised the land, find themselves captives of the state. Cooperatives, as in Russia and Red China, pay the workers in scrip, good only in the collective stores. Fidel Castro's INRA operates out of a 19-story headquarters in Havana and gobbles up businesses and industries in a wide sweeping takeover of all means of production. He even asks children to report on parents who disagree with his plans. Castro puts himself in the construction business and builds model homes for workers. Much of what is done is window dressing. These houses look good, few got them. The housing pinch is even more serious because the workers' pay goes down and taxes go up. This East Havana housing project is never finished. The people and the wealth of Cuba are fast becoming the property of boss Castro, and Castro is becoming the property of the Kremlin. To provide a new military force he can control, Castro organizes a vast civilian militia. There's a woman's militia, student militia, and workers must join the militia to hold jobs. Castro buys arms from abroad. In March 1960, a French ship loaded with Belgian arms catches on fire in Havana Harbor. Suddenly, havoc. Smoke billows around a helicopter on which Castro himself is surveying the scene. Close to 100 men are mangled in the series of explosions. 200 are hurt. The blasts take a frightful toll. The heart of the world is touched by this shocking tragedy. But to the utter surprise of most Americans, Castro seizes upon this emotion-packed moment to launch a savage attack upon the United States. Castro says the ship has been blown up by United States agents. The lie is spread all over the world. There has never been a retraction. It is now apparent that Castro will stop at nothing to gain support for the communist-inspired Hate America campaign. Many Cubans realize now that communism has come to Cuba, and the reaction begins. Some demonstrate at the touring Russian exhibit, but Castro has decreed that to be anti-communist is to be counter-revolutionary, a charge which brings jail and sometimes death. And it is obvious that the strategy was secretly worked out back in the mountains, a bitter pill for the anti-communist forces who fought so well for Castro. In Key West, Florida, anti-communist feeling mounts. Fidel Castro is hanged in effigy. Anti-Castro forces are beginning to join hands in other cities. In Miami, the Democratic Revolutionary Front is formed. In it are united the majority of the anti-Castro forces outside and inside Cuba. The FRD is under the leadership of Dr. Manuel Antonio de Verona, a former Cuban prime minister. The group accuses Castro followers of taking over Cuba by means of terror and political murder. Their charges against Castro read like an indictment of the Hitler regime. They call for his overthrow and are working hard to bring it about. In New York City's Central Park, at the statue of the revered Jose Marti, scores of anti-Castro exiles had already staged a rally which ended in a pitched battle with Castro supporters. Many of the anti-Castro demonstrators had fought with him to overthrow Batista, but are now bitterly against him. Many feel he bought his way into power with money they raised for the revolution. The battle still rages. Havana smiles no more. The hotels are empty. The Cuban peso, once on a par with the dollar, is worth much less. 1,000 people a day try to leave Cuba. Castro now has a television program called The Television World Asks. The questions are carefully screened and usually have to do with some part of the Hate Uncle Sam campaign. 2-hour speeches are not unusual in answer to one question for this most talkative of dictators. He manufactures incidents to whip his viewers into a frenzy, frequently holding up pieces of junk as evidence of some kind of sabotage or other. One night he launches a vicious attack on the Spanish ambassador, the Marquis de Velasca. The irate Marquis comes storming into the studio, screaming, "I've been slandered, I've been slandered." Castro seizes upon the opportunity to perform like the ham actor he is. They argue for the benefit of Castro's large television audience. Seeing his opportunity for a very dramatic move, Castro bangs his fist on the desk and orders the Marquis out of the country. The incident naturally brings thousands of Castro supporters to the streets. They follow the Marquis, shouting, "Get out, you donkey, get out!" Cuba's newspapers are confiscated, except those which print what the government wishes to be read. Radio stations quickly come under government control and can broadcast only government propaganda under tight censorship. The Ministry of Labor takes over the entire Cuban tobacco and cigarette industry. Cuba's foreign minister, Raul Roa, works out deals with communist countries all around the world. He is a Cuban communist with 2 decades of service to the party. He meets many old friends and arranges for delegations from one Iron Curtain country after another to visit Cuba. They arrive by the hundreds and immediately begin to help Sovietize Cuba. Sergei Kudryavtsev, one-time boss of a notorious Russian spy ring in Canada, will be named Soviet ambassador. The delegation from Czechoslovakia, which will sell Cuba boatload after boatload of arms, will remain to show the Cubans how to use them. Polish and Chinese communists will swell the ranks and will soon establish a base for operations all over South America. May Day 1960, the day on which the communist world loves to rally. In Havana, the top officials turn out. Che Guevara, now National Bank president. Strange title for the top communist. Cuban President Osvaldo Dorticos Dorado, the Communist Party figurehead. They are all there with Castro to denounce the United States. Castro's propaganda ministry had used television, the newspapers, and radio for weeks in advance to whip up enthusiasm for this mammoth demonstration. But as time goes on and the promises are not kept, the crowds will grow slimmer. July 1960, that tanker full of Russian oil which Moikoyan promised limps into Havana after a collision in the Mediterranean. When Jersey Standard Oil, Shell, and Texaco refuse to refine the Soviet crude oil, the Castro government takes over their plants. Private American property, $1 billion worth, will be seized in the next few months. Not 1 cent is paid to the owners. There is little prospect of payment if communist precedent is any guide. Not long afterwards, a delegation from the Red Chinese Federation of Trade Unions junkets through Cuba. And Deputy Foreign Trade Minister Lu Jung closes a deal with National Bank President Che Guevara for 500,000 tons of sugar every year for 5 years at a price lower than the United States has been paying. China will join with Soviet Russia in promising to build over 100 factories, cotton mills, and textile plants. And along with Russia, will send technicians seeking oil and iron deposits. Cuba's new Iron Curtain friends say they will build up Cuba's steel plants. Midsummer 1960, thousands of Cubans, urged on by Castro, trekked back into the mountains for the 7th anniversary of the 26th of July movement. While a tired and haggard Castro sits by, banker Guevara, more and more in a key role, says Cuba is an island defended by Russian rockets. Khrushchev voices the same threat from Moscow. A little later, Castro puts in an appearance at the first Latin American Youth Congress, a communist-led gathering. Guevara steals the spotlight. If I were asked whether our revolution is communist, he tells the intense delegates, I would define it as Marxist. By Marxist, of course, he means communist. Raul Castro leads the applause. Castro, tired and drawn, mouths such red phrases as imperialist aggressors, capitalist monopolies, and Yankee reactionaries, and pronounces a death sentence on all American business in Cuba. By now, the Cuban crowds are rallied behind the banners which say, Cuba forever, Yankees no. Castro's followers bury American business and dump the symbolic caskets into the sea. The crowd doesn't know that confiscated funds have already been shipped to Swiss banks by members of Castro's clique. September 1960, Fidel Castro flies into New York at the suggestion of Nikita Khrushchev. 60 bearded followers tag along. They will attend the 15th meeting of the United Nations General Assembly. A small but noisy group of sympathizers is on hand to greet Castro, and he attempts to talk to them. Mindful of his safety and under strict instructions, the New York police insist that he move on. He protests, but his guardians are firm and send him on his way. In a propaganda move, Castro moves to New York's Harlem after a phony incident with a downtown hotel. He soon has a visitor. Who else but Nikita Khrushchev, the boss of the communist world? What a bitter pill for the anti-communist followers of Castro, who endured the suffering and the fighting in the mountains of Cuba, to discover that the revolutionary road has led to this love scene between their leader and Nikita Khrushchev on the sidewalks of New York. Every time they meet, Nikita and Fidel repeat the performance. Arriving at the United Nations, Castro proceeds immediately to place Cuba squarely in the Soviet camp. Khrushchev greets Nunez Jimenez. Like a professional cheerleader, Nikita will lead the communist bloc applause as Castro supports every communist proposal and mouths his bitter attacks against the United States. The bearded Cuban delivers the longest address ever heard at the United Nations, over 4 hours. General Assembly President Boland is forced to put the brakes on him when he attacks American presidential candidates. He supports, without reservation, Khrushchev's proposals to oust Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, to pull the UN out of the Congo, and to admit Red China to the UN. His rude manners, his propaganda blasts, his crude unconcern for the delegates' time lower his standing as a world leader. Fidel joins Khrushchev at the Russian embassy. In a matter of weeks, large quantities of arms and munitions will flow into Cuba from Russia. Communist agents will swarm over Latin America. Diplomatic mail pouches will be stuffed with communist propaganda, and Cuban embassies will spread it. Khrushchev even lends Castro a plane to take him and his party back to Cuba. Moscow's bridgehead to the Americas, long wished for by the Kremlin and the Chinese communists, is now a reality. Fidel Castro, the bearded opportunist, has betrayed his own country. He has provided a base from which will be sown the seed of communist revolution throughout the Western Hemisphere. And Liborio, the simple Cuban farmer, has little hope for freedom, while Fidel Castro and his beloved Cuba stay locked in the embrace of the Russian bear. For America, there is danger on the doorstep.